The American Mafia is an organization with a long and violent past. This program contains graphic images that may be disturbing to younger and more sensitive viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
The mob is not a business. It's a way of life. You come into that life, they tell you straight out, you either leave in a box or you don't leave at all. I saw more guys leave at an early age than died of old age. We know that if we make the mistake, the guy next to us, who's been our best friend for 20 years, can be called upon to take us out. Do you get numb to it? No. You never get numb. At least I did.
No one can tell you more about the American Mafia than Michael Franzese, because he truly lived it. From the streets to a mansion to a prison cell, he knows how it works and why it works so well for so long.
Michael was probably the biggest money maker ever.
I think his entire career is amazing.
In this definitive guide to the mob, Michael Franzese explains how to get in, how to get made, and how to make big money.
I said, Junior, I'm going to show you more money than you ever saw in your life. I'm bringing him $2 million a week.
He's the only made man to ever publicly quit America's most notorious criminal organization, and he has somehow lived to tell about it.
The truth is, if you leave the mob, there is a very high likelihood you will not survive.
I'm shocked that Michael Franzese still walks the streets.
Michael learned everything there is to know about the mob, plus one thing that so many gangsters never learn: how to stay alive.
Who am I? My name is Michael Franzese, and when it comes to this life, La Cosa Nostra, Mafia, in this country, I know as much or more about this life than anybody that ever lived it. Why? Because I lived it. I was a made member of the Colombo family. I made as much or more money for that life than anybody since Al Capone.
Michael Franzese.
And I can tell you about every facet of that life that you need to know. And I'm not telling you from behind a curtain.
Fellas, let's go.
I don't have any axe to grind. I'm telling you because I lived it. And this was my life.
Michael's introduction to the mob began with his father, Sonny Franzese, a feared gangster and underboss for the Colombo crime family.
My dad was my idol. I loved him. Great father, great husband to my mom.
Sonny is a legend in his own time, okay? Everybody looked up to him.
But I did see the other side of him a couple of times. I seen people shudder at the name of Sonny Franzese. They want to mess with him. For instance, I'd be playing baseball, and he would walk on the field, everybody's looking at him, and, you know, once or twice I noticed I'm up there, and, you know, pitch come over the plate, should have been strike three, but the umpire wouldn't call it. Never called strike three on me when he seen Dad, and...
He was the man, and we all respected him for that.
I thought I had a normal childhood. I had FBI agents outside my door 24/7. Seeing people come and go, who went to jail, who got killed. That's the world I grew up in.
Michael's entry into this violent world became official when he witnessed one of the most famous hits in mob history. It's June 28, 1971. The second annual Italian-American Unity Day rally in New York City. Joe Colombo, head of one of New York's 5 mafia families, and Michael's father's boss, is about to make a speech.
We probably had well over 50,000 people. We had a big stage set up. He motioned to me. He said, Mike, I want you to head towards Lincoln Center, and I want you to hand these brochures out to everybody. And I said, okay, Joey, no problem. And I was exhilarated. It was a great day. And I turn away to walk away from him, and I get maybe 10 steps. And I hear boom, 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 shots. People start to scream. I turn around and somebody yells out, Joey's been hit, Joey's been hit. When he got shot, I was right there. I was the last person he spoke to. I was 21.
This moment had a lasting effect on Michael. and was the beginning of his life in the mob. To understand Michael's role in the mob, you must first understand its roots, which go back to Sicily, a small island off the coast of Italy.
There's no mafia in the United States. Mafia exists in Italy. It doesn't exist here. In America, it's called La Cosa Nostra. It means this thing of ours.
For hundreds of years, Sicily was occupied or controlled by foreign intruders, foreign invaders. And what this led to was, in effect, patriotic groups that sprang up. Families sometimes were band together to oppose these oppressors. So these origins of the Mafia were well-intentioned.
But these patriots eventually turned to crime. When a wave of Italian immigrants sailed to America in the 1800s, many of these criminals joined them.
When many of the Italian immigrants came over here, the Mafia was able to gain a foothold. They called it back then the Black Hand. Black Hand essentially extorted Italian businessmen. That was their business back in Italy. That's what they did over here.
For the first 2 decades in the 20th century, Italian or Sicilian gangsters in America were operating on their own. They were just street thugs, robbers, thieves, extortionists. There was no real organization.
Organization came to these street gangsters thanks to a law passed by the United States Congress in 1919.
Now, all this changed when Prohibition became the law in America. Overnight, a lot of these Sicilian and Italian gangsters saw what an opportunity. This could be a gold mine. They now got into bootlegging, and overnight they became millionaires.
They learned early on that the only way to get power is through money. It ruled America then, it rules America today.
So whatever was out there, whatever made a big buck, they were into, and they had no competition.
During this period, the American Mafia thrived. But rivalries were soon formed, turning New York City into a violent gangland.
From 1930 to 1931, 40 to 50 casualties occurred. When you see these movies in the 1930s about these cars coming around, shooting up streets, it's true. That's what they were doing in New York.
This wave of violence ended when a young gangster named Charles Lucky Luciano rose to power and realized that war was bad for business. Luciano and 4 other mob leaders became heads of the original 5 families and created a commission where the groups could peacefully coexist.
It was Luciano's idea of creating a commission, and if violence had to be used, it had to be clear through the commission. So the whole idea was, when you think about it, ingenious. The commission basically brought organization to organized crime.
Luciano's organization grew in the decades to come and dominated much of Brooklyn, where the story of Michael Franzese continues.
Well, see, the thing is, you can do anything in this town that you wanted to do. It was a safe haven. Nobody would ever give you up, ever. I mean, you could shoot a guy in the street, you can have a brawl, you could blow up a car. Nobody knew anything. Now, this really feels at home. This was our neighborhood. Well, I tell you, though, it brings back a lot of memories. A lot of these things, the tattoos, come on, you never had a tattoo place around here. We weren't supposed to get tattoos because you don't want any identifying marks if you were to do anything, you know? Now, what's this? Chinese or something? Forget it, we never had any Chinese here. No Chinese places, no tattoo places. My grandfather came over here in 1910, 1911. This was it. Now, you see, this was our building right here. You see this? That's where it all started, and this is where my father started. You know, again, he was one of 4 brothers, and they were all tough guys. You know, my Uncle Nufrio, in the basement of one of these houses here, guy owed him money, didn't want to pay. My uncle actually hung him up and had a blowtorch to his feet, and was blowtorching the guy's feet until he paid. That was my uncle. Everybody was afraid of him.
Even though he grew up with organized crime, Michael was never pushed toward a career in it. Surprisingly, his father had always tried to steer him away.
Yeah, my dad didn't want me involved in a life. He had hopes for me to get an education. He wanted me to be a doctor. I mean, that's what I heard all my life. Go to school, be a doctor.
Michael's plans changed dramatically when his father was convicted in a bank robbery case and sentenced to 50 years in prison. At 19, Michael became the new head of the household and turned to Joe Colombo and the mob as a means to support his family. Even witnessing his new mentor being gunned down on that fateful day in June of 1971 didn't sway Michael from entering the family business.
For some strange reason, it had the opposite effect on me. From that point on, I started to get more interested and more involved. And so I went to see Dad in prison, and I said, Dad, I'm not going to school anymore. I got to help you out somewhere. You're going to die in here. He was upset with me. So we kind of went at it, and after a while, he knew my mind was made up. And he said to me, son, I got to ask you one question. He says, and I need an answer, honest answer. And I said, what? He says, if you had to kill somebody, could you do it? And I thought a minute, you know, and I said, well, if the circumstances were right, I think I can do it, yeah. He said, that's the right answer. Go home. I'm going to send word downtown. Somebody will be in touch with you. Do whatever you're told. That was it.
Michael Franzese made millions as a made man in the American Mafia. He says the secret to the organization's success is a simple one. Run your gang like a company.
The mob is structured very similar to corporate structure in America, and I know that's one of the reasons that we survived and prospered, because of the structure and the discipline. How do you compare it? In our life, you have a boss, and the boss would be comparable to the CEO of any major corporation. You have an underboss, which would be his executive vice president. You have a consigliere, who is his advisor. Boss needs to know something, he turns to his advisor, find this out for me. Then you have the capo regimes that I would consider to be the vice presidents. And they're in charge of the various departments, and those departments are run by the soldiers. They're the workers. They're the guys that are out on the street and really making the whole deal function.
The essence of the mob is that the people who actually carry out the criminal assignments and collect the money, they get to keep some. The rest, it gets kicked upstairs.
The boss gets a cut of everything. If the capo regime is honest, and he better be, otherwise he's in trouble, then it goes up the chain. The underboss will get a piece, the consigliere is supposed to get a piece, and the boss gets the piece.
The loyalty is supposed to operate both ways. If the boss insists on too large a cut, then you start to get discipline problems in the ranks. A boss who is shrewd understands that you want to get your share of everything, but you want to make sure everybody else eats along the way.
These titles are reserved only for made members of La Cosa Nostra. And to be made, you must be of Italian descent. But the mob needed plenty of other personnel for its operations. Those guys were called associates.
For every made man in the mob, there might be 10 associates. You could work for the mob, you could profit, but you were non-Italian. You could never become an inducted, sworn, made member.
This family hierarchy, along with the commission structure, kept bloodshed to a minimum and led to the mob's extraordinary success. None of this would have been possible without a mob mediation tool known as the sit-down.
Remember, the cardinal rule of the mob is don't interfere with making money.
Yeah, one thing you never really hear about, which is such a significant part of our life, is the sit-down.
A sit-down is a meeting, and it's a way of resolving a dispute without actually getting violent, and it's part of the legacy of Luciano.
You have a sit down because one side knows that this side could get very violent with that side. What we really want to do is come to this table, sit down, and let's end this thing amicably. That's the way you make money. That's the way things go smooth.
More money was lost or made at a sit-down than you can imagine. I'm talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. Everything was resolved and decided in a sit-down.
And if they can resolve it, it'll be resolved at that level. If necessary, it'll be taken up to a higher level.
They're going to make a decision so that this thing doesn't have to be in the streets. And 99% of the time, it does work smooth.
Michael Franzese learned the power of the sit-down when he was a rising star in the mob and found himself toe-to-toe with another up-and-comer named John Gotti.
John and I are both soldiers at the time, and two of my associates come to me and they say, Mike, we got this flea market. We got a guy in a flea market who's got trouble with his partner. His partner's dealing drugs. They said, if you can help him out, and you'll take a percentage of the market. We find a drug dealer, we chase him out. End of story. A week, 10 days later, I get a call from John Gotti. He says, Mike, there's a guy in a flea market. He's with me. I said, too late, John. I threw him out, and him and I are going at it. Back and forth. We can't resolve anything there. So we had to, boom, have a sit down. My dad was my captain at the time, and I said, Dad, I can't resolve this alone. You got to come. I said, I know you're on parole, but we got to work it out somehow. So we meet in a sit down in somebody's house. And I said, Dad, look, I already understand John. This guy can't lose. I'm going to tell John I'm buying you out. He's going to say, you don't buy me out, I buy you out. At the end of the day, that's what I really want. So we go in there and I said, hey, John, I'll tell you what, I'm going to buy you out. I'll give you 250 grand, you're out. You don't buy me out, I buy you out. He said, I'll buy you out of the market, and that's how we're going to resolve it. I said, I'll tell you what, John, you got it, no problem. Because I knew we couldn't work together. There was no way. And that's the strategy that my dad and I used. So he bought us out, 250 grand. That was a typical sit down.
Understanding the art of being a successful wise guy takes years of study. It all starts with becoming a recruit, which means finding a way to get on the mob's radar.
Nobody's doing any recruiting. Nobody's dragging anybody into anything. Nobody says, you come here. It's nothing like that. You have to go after that.
Once a guy shows some promise, he can become an official recruit only through the recommendation of a made member.
Guy under my dad, he picked me up and he took me to see, at that time, the acting boss. He said, I got a message from your father. He said, you want to become a member of this life. Here's the deal. From now on, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're on call to serve this family. He said, from this point on, I'm putting you with a capo regime, a captain, Andrew Russo. He's your guy. Anything Andrew tells you, you do without question. Can you do that? Yes. That's it. You're in.
However, it's still a long road from new recruit to made man.
Yeah, when I was a recruit, this was my office. Every day I had to be here. We had a social club right up the street. Wear a suit and be here, and that was it. When you're a recruit, you just shut up and listen. You speak when you're spoken to, but you observe and you learn the life. If you're smart, that's what you do. And you become a very, very good listener. I learned a lot during that recruiting period.
But there were times when Michael had to learn the hard way.
You can't make mistakes. So one day, I had to be at the social club up the street. So I'm driving in from Long Island. I'm on the Belt Parkway. There's a ton of traffic. So I get there, I'm late. Forget about it. My capo regime tells me, how could you be late? Don't you ever do this again? You're not worthy to be a member. I mean, he ran a riot act on me. He said, tomorrow you be at Monty's at 1 o'clock. We got an appointment. I said, all right, all right. So I get to Monty's the next day. I'm there at 12 o'clock. 1 o'clock, 1:30, 2 o'clock, 2:30. Finally, it was about 4:30, 4:45. I see my captain, Andrew, pull up. He's okay. You get the message? I said, I got it, Chief. He said, go home. That was it. I was never late again.
It's not enough just to know the rules. A recruit needs to prove how he'll be of value to the organization.
You kind of distinguish yourself in that life as to what kind of role you're going to play. Every guy in their life is always looking for the next score. But some guys were a little bit more talented than others in finding that score and developing it and making money out of it. Other guys, they were a little more talented in doing what we called the work. The muscle, I guess you can call it. And you kind of distinguish yourself as either or. Rarely are you both. Early on in my recruiting period, I kind of distinguished myself as an earner. I'll tell you this, there was a lot more workers than there were earners. Quite honestly, the guys that relished the violence, they didn't make any money. They were doing the work because they couldn't do anything else.
An example of one such worker was a tough enforcer named Nicholas Grancio, known on the street as Nicky Black.
Nicky Black was, he was a soldier in our family for a while. He had a bar. I had to go see him one day, and he's in a back room, and he says, Mike, come on back here. And he's got some guy back there who's a gambler. Gambler owes him money, and the guy wasn't paying him. So he puts the guy's hand on the bar, he takes a hammer, boom, breaks the guy's knuckles, right there. The guy's screaming. He says, imagine this guy, Mike. He says, you don't want to pay me. I gave him 1 chance, 2 chances, boom. Got to teach him a lesson. That's Nicky Black.
But on January 7th, 1992, Nicky Black's career came to an abrupt end. For Michael, This was another important lesson in mob life.
This life is like a wheel. Things turn around. If you're quick to pull the trigger, when it comes your turn, and it will someday, people are going to be quick to do the same with you.
Michael worked the streets of Brooklyn for almost 2 years, waiting patiently to become a made member of the Colombo family. The call finally came on Halloween, 1975.
I get a call to meet at the social club, wear a suit. I kind of assumed something was up that night. 10 o'clock at night, we start driving. We end up at a catering hall. I don't ask any question. Get out of the car, go into the hall. I see a bunch of other guys there. Figure, hey, not a surprise party. This must be it. Yeah, we go inside. We're all in this back room. They start calling us in one at a time. Mike, come here. Mike, come here. I go in. I see a place where there's a little flicker of light. I see all the captains lined up. We had about 15 in the family at that time. So I get to the head of this horseshoe configuration where the boss is standing. Underboss is next to him. He grabs my hand, takes a knife, cuts my finger. He squeezes it, some blood drops on the floor. Told me to cup my hands. They took a picture of a saint, the Catholic altar card, lit it aflame, put it in my hands. Everybody thinks it was a symbol of toughness. It's not. It just burns quickly. It was just symbolic. Tom DeBello was the acting boss at the time. He said to me, "Are you ready to take the oath?" I said, "Yeah." Tonight, Michael Francis, you're being born again into a new life, into La Cosa Nostra. You violate this oath, you're going to burn in hell like the saint is burning in your hands. He said, "Do you accept?" And I said, "Yes, I do." That's how it started for me. 5-minute ceremony, you're in. But it's very intense. They want you to know the seriousness of what you're getting involved in. The important thing to remember about that is there were 6 of us that night that took the oath. I'm the only one alive today. Not one of them died of natural causes. There's no other way out.
Salute, boys.
They had a whole ceremony designed to impress on people who were admitted to the inner sanctum of the family that this is really a step from which you cannot retreat. Once you've accepted the rule, you get the benefits, but there's no way out.
I understand the life intimately well, and I've done something that, to this day, I don't believe anybody else has ever done or ever been able to do, and that is that I've walked away from that life publicly, not entered a witness protection program, and here some 20 years later, live to tell about it.
When Michael Francis pledged his life to the American Mafia in 1975, he was asked to carry on the mob's most honored tradition, earning money.
You know, when it comes to making money, the mob has a billion different ways. Start with one of the original money-making things for the mob, the numbers business. How? How did it work? You would pick 3 numbers, put down 50 cents, to have 3 numbers hit. If you hit for 50 cents, you get back 600.
It was a big racket in the neighborhoods, especially in New York. It looked like it was penny ante. You'd bet a nickel or a dime. Very few people even bet $1, but it would get as much as 1,000 to 1 chance.
Now, where did the number come from? Every day in the newspaper, they would list the attendance at the racetracks. And the last 3 numbers of the attendance would be the numbers. That's it. You hit that number, you got it.
But you'd have several hundred bookmakers throughout the city that were taking these numbers and bringing in massive amounts of money each day.
This particular house right here, my dad's sister, Red Rose, her husband, Johnny, they called him Murphy. He was a little bit of an alcoholic, he was a character, but he was one of the main numbers runners here in the town. And it was very lucrative. You involved everybody in the neighborhood. Little old women, you know, kids, guys. And they all got to know the numbers guy. We'd send the runners out to all different parts of the neighborhood, and they would be stationed in different places, and they would take the numbers. And hey, you put down 50 cents, you get 600. That was big money, especially back then.
Very few people ever won.
Wasn't it a good thing for the neighborhood? It was a little hope. It was like, you know, wise guys didn't go around saying you never know, but that's what it was. It was you never know. You might win.
It was a pipe dream for them, but it was a multi-million-dollar bundle for the mob.
And if it was so horrible, could the government have taken it over?
Bookmaking, taking bets. Bookmakers bet on just about anything.
So they went into everything: baseball, horse racing, basketball, whatever sport there was.
It's illegal, obviously, because you're not paying taxes to the government. That's what makes it illegal.
Preying on gamblers has been a mob moneymaker for decades. Colombo family bookies took bets at watering holes like this one in Brooklyn. It pulled in hundreds of thousands of dollars every week.
Now, the great thing about it, you didn't have to put cash down. You took credit. You want $5,000 on such and such a horse in the 8th race, boom. Okay, you write his name on a paper and that's it. Yeah, the bookmakers in the neighborhood, you know, they give you credit. You know, 5 grand, 10 grand, yeah, whatever you want, no problem. But if a guy don't pay, somebody needs to collect. We were pretty good at collecting debts.
This was multi-millions, and it became, for many people in the Mafia, their bread and butter.
I always had 12 or 13 bookmakers answering to me. I'd get a cut of the action. They would operate wherever they wanted to. Anybody bothered them, hey, I'm with Michael, hands off.
This wasn't just about gamblers laying down bets. Often it involved the athletes themselves.
You know, when the athletes used to come to us, because for some reason they're the worst gamblers in the world. They may play the sport well, they don't know how to gamble on it. For instance, a lot of the athletes from some of the local colleges, they used to hang out in some of the clubs in Manhattan. We were always there. So we would see one of these guys, and we would start to cultivate him. Hey, come on, you know, have a drink, come by the bar, and we'd bring girls around him, you know, it's always a good attraction. So after a couple of weeks, I'd bring him to the table. Hey, sit down. I said, you know, you're a senior, right? Yeah. You're a pretty good player, yeah. You know you're 6'2". You know you're not going to the pros. Yeah, I know. Let me ask you this. How much money you got in your pocket? Oh, I'm broke. That's what you hear all the time. So you're broke. Why are you broke? Every time you play, they fill that arena up, 16,000 people. I said, let me educate you a little bit. I'm going to do something real smart. You got 15 games left, okay? Tomorrow night, you're favored to win by 10. Don't win by 10. Don't lose the game. We got some morals about us. We love your team. We want you to win. But don't cover the spread. Win by 7, win by 8, win by 5. You do that. Here, pull 10 grand out of my pocket, put it on a table, slide it over to him. Very hard to refuse. He sees that 10, his eyes open up. And that's the number. Not 5, that 10,000, that's what does it. He'll take it. But here's what happens every time. It gets to them. They'll do it maybe 2 times, maybe 3. Inevitably, they come back. Hey, Mike, I can't do this anymore. The pressure's getting to me. I got 30 grand. It's more than I ever had. I'm good. What do you mean? No, we made a deal. You got 10 games to go, bro. Unless you want to go speak to your coach, tell him how good you've been playing. Want to go talk to your girlfriend, mom and dad, they'll be proud of you. How about we go to the newspaper, you know? Plaster this all over the place. Want to go to the cops? I don't care. They're going to lock me up one day anyway. You're done when I tell you you're done. They make one mistake, one time, they're done.
If you had gambling, you had loan sharks who had to lend money to the bookmakers because the bookmakers would get themselves in trouble because they were essentially gamblers themselves.
The mob's banking system was often run out of its social clubs. They referred to money lending as shylocking. And Michael learned this art at the Carroll Street establishment run by his captain, Andy Russo.
Some rough things happened in this social club. There was more high-level business done in this place than you can imagine. Shylocking, major part of mob business. What is shylocking? We lend out money at usurious rates.
The loan shark would essentially give, say, $5,000 to the bookmaker. That $5,000 became $5,500 in 1 week. By the second week, that $5,000 became $6,000. By the loan shark extending loans to bookmakers, They essentially owned that bookmaker.
Because you can't pay that interest. You're paying 50% a year on your money, 100% a year on your money. There's no way. And you can't miss a payment. This is every week. You got to be there, and it's cash.
Now, in addition to doing it with gambling, many people in legitimate businesses couldn't get loans. Who would they go to? They'd have to go to loan sharks run by the Mafia.
Quite often, a guy would come to me, he needed 100 grand, 150 grand. He had a business. I knew he couldn't pay, but it was really the business that I wanted. So when he couldn't pay, I took it over. Well, you know, mob guys had one basic philosophy. They believed that everybody's money really belonged to them. They just had to figure out how to get it, right? So nightclubs were a real mark. I'll give you an example. A club out in Long Island called Jupiter's. The guy that owned the place was a guy by the name of Danny Colombo. I went in to see him one night and I said, listen, your place is becoming known. I says, I don't know if you know how things work over here, but pretty soon you're going to have every wise guy in New York knocking on the door. I said, they're going to take a piece of whatever you got here. Oh, Michael, I don't know if no, you have to give it to them. I said, if you don't, they're going to close the place down. What do you need that headache for? I want you to make money. I'm not going to bother you, but I'm going to protect you from everybody. Anybody walks in that door, you tell them I'm with Michael Franzese, nobody's going to bother you. But that's going to cost you, Danny, you know? So you give me 20% or whatever you got over here. Christmas time, you make it a little better. I says, and you're going to have the best place on Long Island. Not only will I do that, but I'll make sure all my guys come here every Friday, Saturday night. We're going to spend money here. So you got it made. Now, some guys take to that nicely. The guys that don't take it nicely, well, maybe we come back next week and we make them understand that you're going to have to do this.
Rackets like bookmaking and extortion were solid money makers from the mob's early days. But when La Cosa Nostra found a way to infiltrate America's workforce, they became virtually untouchable. From loan sharking to sports gaming, the American Mafia had 1,000 ways to illegally make money. But when they took ownership of the unions, they became almost invincible.
One of the most effective power sources for the mob were the unions. I don't know if people realize, but unions were born out of mob labor. We supported them early on. We really created the union power in this country.
As far back as the 1930s, the mob established close ties with labor unions, giving them a solid foothold in legitimate industries.
A lot of Italians took jobs on the dock. You know, they were construction workers, they were truck drivers, and big corporations were taking advantage of the workers. I mean, these guys were thugs too. They'd hire their goons to go out and beat people up, break the strikes. Well, Italians, we didn't take that. And what'd they do? They came to guys like us, street guys, because we fought back.
And this was an era when unions were beginning to really emerge in the 1930s and become powerful forces themselves.
And eventually, you know, mob guys realized that, hey, this was something that we should be involved in. And then from that point, we rose to the top and we became the leaders. And we controlled the unions.
And by taking over the unions, they could rob the unions from their welfare funds, their membership funds, and they could also shake down the employers. You want labor peace? You got to deal with us.
Through a union, you could control an entire industry. Let me give you an example. By controlling the concrete unions, you could determine when concrete was poured and when it wasn't poured. So that if you, the mob, controlled the union, and that union didn't kick back to you, you could basically shut down an entire site.
By the 1970s, the major mob families controlled all the labor unions in New York City. But instead of fighting over territory, a cooperative was formed, and each member received a cut.
Rather than competing among each other, what they decided to do is bring them all together in what they call the club. And the club was a mechanism through which all the concrete companies would get work allocated by the mobsters. The family that controlled that company would get 2%, and they would create another 2% tax, which they would divide up among the families. So basically every major building built in New York during this period of time paid a 4% tax to the American Mafia.
Another perk of controlling the unions was the ability to hand out cushy, high-paying jobs. Michael saw these rewards himself when he worked on what was then the biggest construction project in the world.
Right back there, which was the site of the World Trade Center, was kind of the place where this began for me, because my dad got me a union job. I could tell you some stories there, boy, because that was mobbed up. My cousin Tootie was a shop steward there. I was up on the 80-some-odd floor. They made me a bell ringer on the hoist. Anytime anybody else worked, I worked along with them, so I got a ton of overtime. So as a young kid going to high school, I was making myself $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 a week.
In the 70s and 80s, what you see is the mob permeates the activities of almost any major economic activity in the city of New York. So, for example, if you're importing fruit, you've got to move it through the docks or it rots. And if all of a sudden the longshoremen start to really slow up on the loading, you can lose an entire shipment. So the ability to calibrate the flow of work, the speed of work, gave the Mafia a real opportunity to dominate legitimate businesses.
In this town here, from every piece of fish that came in, to every piece of cement, and every window that went into every one of those buildings, the mob had a piece of. We had a piece of everything in this town. We owned this town.
The Italian mob made little effort to hide their connection to the unions. But when it came to drugs, things were much more complicated.
I tell you this, in a Colombo family, we were told straight out, you get involved with drugs, you die. Hands off, that was the policy.
The mob's policy on drugs was they were supposed to stay out of it. You were not to be involved in drug trafficking. They did that with a wink and a nod.
Don't believe a myth that the mob was opposed to narcotics. They prospered and loved it. What happened was simply this. The Sicilian Mafia in the 1950s would set up heroin stills all over Europe. They needed a big market. And Joe Bonanno, who was then the head of the Bonanno family in New York, went to Sicily, had a meeting with the bosses of the Mafia in Palermo. He said, you have the product, we have the market. We will show you where to distribute it. We will now bring it into the inner cities, New York, Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, all over America. If anyone's responsible for the drug upsurge in America, it's the Mafia. And if there's any spot in hell that's reserved for people who did that to us, they deserve to be there.
The mob's stated policy on drugs was, we do not get involved in drug dealing. It was not based on a moral principle of being against drugs. It was based on the view that the drug sentences were very, very tough. And there was a concern that if you were caught drug dealing, you'd face such a harsh sentence that you might wind up turning on the mob and becoming a witness for the government.
Ultimately, the Colombo family avoided the drug trade for a very simple reason.
Bottom line, it was bad for business. Brings a lot of heat, a lot of violence around drugs. We believe that there was a lot of rats in the drug business. It was bad for business. You had to stay away from it. Almost anything else was fair game.
With that directive, Michael found himself the score of a lifetime.
I fell into something that was 100 times better than drugs. It was the best thing since Prohibition.
By the 1980s, La Cosa Nostra, this thing of ours, had created an unprecedented criminal empire. But they were always hungry for more. Colombo soldier Michael Francis knew the drug trade was forbidden in his family. The young earner needed a new scam to bring the boss's money. Suddenly, he found a big one.
As active as I was, I got a deal a day, and I fell into something that was 100 times better than drugs. And that's the gasoline tax business, we'll call it. So I fall into this deal that's unbelievable, amazing. And it started by this guy, Larry Irizzo. He comes to me, an Italian guy, and he says, Mike, I got a bunch of gas stations, but I figured out how to take the tax money from the government on every gallon of gasoline. So, tax from the government, sounds great. What do we do? Figure, hey, he's Italian from the neighborhood, I'll give him a shot. So we go into business, and I put this guy with him that I trusted. He was actually a butcher, Vinny the Butcher, big imposing guy, scar across his head. Figure he'll watch this guy. And this is how we started. One Saturday, Vinny, he comes to my house, knocks on the door, I open the door. He's got a box, big box like this. So I figured it's meat. He said, hey, Chief, it ain't meat. I said, what is it? He said, it's the first week's take in our new operation, the gas business. I open it up, $380,000 in cash. Got my attention, right? This is one of the stations we serve. Well, we serviced a bunch of them, but this was one of them. And basically, here's how the scheme worked. At that time, the tax on every gallon of gasoline was about 35 cents a gallon. The gas station owner was responsible to collect that tax and to pay the government on a quarterly basis. Well, let's say after the first quarter, you don't send it in. They write you a letter. Every day the register's ringing. That 30 cents keeps adding up. 6 months, 7 months. Finally, after a year, they get fed up. They come down to the gas station. We already know they're coming down. We shut that door. The gas station's closed. The government is out of a year's worth of taxes that was due to them. I wait 2 weeks, and I bring another guy in, and we start the process all over again.
I had all the gas stations along Grand Central Parkway, had them all. They're all mine. He was selling to probably 400 to 500 stations here throughout the city.
But now the government got smart. Okay, we're going to stop all of this.
Instead of collecting taxes from all the gas stations, the government went directly to the wholesalers and required each one to have a license.
We're going to make the wholesaler responsible, and we're going to make them license it so we know exactly who they are. They have to get a license, and we're going to know that they're responsible people, because if you got to be licensed, you got to be responsible, right? So they thought. Well, they thought they were going to shut us down. Well, you know, mob guys, we got connections. I had a connection in Albany where I was able to get licenses. It was basically the same scheme, okay? Except now we're licensed companies instead of gas station operators.
They basically would set up phony corporations, then they would sell the gas from one corporation to the next corporation. Ultimately, the last corporation would go bankrupt and the tax would never be collected.
Ironically, the government's efforts only made the scam more lucrative.
They actually made it better for us because we were able to buy directly from the major oil companies in greater volume, which was really funny because we were selling it back to their own gas stations.
Yes, we would go into the owner and ask him, how many loads you buying from Mobil? And he said, well, we'd buy 8. You know, and I'd say, well, buy 6 from Mobil, buy 2 from us. And they were thrilled. So they'd buy, you know, 2 loads from us a week, and before you know it, they're asking to buy another one. And I say, hey, don't get crazy now, because Mobil's going to come down. You still got to buy gas from them.
The scam grew rapidly as Michael found aggressive new partners. When he teamed up with a crew of Russian gangsters, the gas operation became one of the wealthiest scams in the history of organized crime.
And at the end of the day, between the Russian crew that I had in Brighton Beach and the crew that I had from Long Island and up and down the East Coast, we were selling 500 million gallons of gas a month, and the government never was able to touch us.
The success of this business did present one large challenge to the Francis crew: how to deal with piles and piles of money that reeked of gasoline.
I'm bringing in $30 to $40 million a month in cash. It was all small bills. Come in a gas station, don't buy with hundreds, right? Dollars, fives, tens, and it all smelled like gas.
The guy who's pumping the gas is the one who handles the money first. So from there on in, it's got the smell of gas on it. And it stays with you.
Couldn't go to a normal bank because everything stunk of gas.
You were happy just if someone could just give you some clean money, you know, so that you can go out that night without your money stinking, you know?
But ever the innovator, Michael came up with a plan to literally launder his money.
I said, you know, buy a couple of refrigerators and get baking soda and put baking soda in the refrigerator, and we'll put the cash in there first, and we'll take the smell out of it, and then you can do whatever you want with it.
Michael realized his gas scam was a game changer and would affect every mob family in New York. So he set up a meeting with the head of the Colombo crime family, Carmine Jr. Persico.
I said, Junior, I'm going to show you more money than you ever saw in your life. I said, it's gas. He said, gas? I said, yes, gas. I think the first week I brought him 400, 450,000, 600,000. It turns out I'm bringing him $2 million a week.
Michael had now distinguished himself as a major player. Soon he would receive that rare honor in the ranks of La Cosa Nostra, a promotion.
Now, hey, Mike, you're doing a great job. You're a capo regime. He appoints me a capo regime, so now I'm a capo, right? Well, the operation started to grow, the money started to pour in, I'm starting to get popular with a lot of guys.
Michael's gas scam became so lucrative that other bosses began contacting him. He soon heard from one of the biggest names in organized crime.
Fat Tony Salerno, boss of the Genovese. Here's what's happening, right? You know, he had a big cigar, he used to sit there. Tony was a character. He said, oh, this gas station, what are you doing? I said, I got gas stations, Tony, you know, I'm selling gas. He said, I hear you're doing pretty good. I said, yeah, I'm doing good. He said, I got these guys around me, they ain't got 2 nickels to rub together. He said, you put them to work, you do me a favor. I said, Tony, no problem, I'll give them a gas station. And he said, well, how much could they earn? I said, well, they'll earn $1,500 a week. Would that make you happy? He says, $1,500? He says, give them 500, give me 1,000. I said, Tony, you got it, whatever you want, you're the boss, right? You make a lot of friends like that. So that spread. I was bringing money to bosses of other families, so you get kind of popular when everybody's earning.
Michael was on top and had every intention of enjoying his wealth.
We bought a helicopter, nice Learjet 25A we had. I always had 2 or 3 boats at one time. I had an 8,000 square foot house. Bought a house in Florida. I had 2 boats down there. But the success in that life is actually a double-edged sword. Because, yeah, you're doing well and you're prospering and you're getting attention, but people at the top start to get nervous. This guy's getting too powerful. I got a bullseye on my back. I felt the heat starting to build in a certain way.
A gasoline tax scam made Michael Franzese a rich and powerful mafioso. But this overwhelming success came with a price and made Michael a marked man.
I've seen guys get killed because they were becoming too strong, too powerful. You know, that's that double-edged sword. When you start to become powerful in that life, the guys at top are more eager to jump on you because you're a threat now. In that life, when you rise to leadership, you don't do it by a vote. You take the boss out.
Michael was now a captain in the Colombo crime family, and he knew well that to stay on top, violence was a necessity.
Violence is a part of the life. Murder is a part of the life. And there's no way to sugarcoat it. It is what it is. And if you're called upon to do that, you have to do it. And in a weird kind of way, we looked at it as something noble. Why? Because we take an oath. And we realize if we violate that oath, we're going to pay with our lives. We accept that. When I had to do what I had to do, I did it. But it always troubled me. I never wanted to be involved in that. You do it anyway because you got to, or you pay for it with your life.
The main reasons a made member will get whacked would be fear of disloyalty, fear that the person is going to go to authorities. Someone could get whacked if they were stealing money. If you had a case where someone slept with another made member's wife, that could result in being whacked. And then you could get whacked if you were considered to be generally a danger to the mob.
They don't necessarily have to know that you're a threat. If they think you're a threat to the organization, they'll hit you.
You find out later on that, you know, guys get killed for the wrong reason, and it's not always about respect. A lot of politics involved. It's normally over money.
When there are rivalries, they decide to find reasons to kill you.
If you're in trouble, if you're going to get taken out, it's going to come from your own family. It's always within the family. You got to watch out for your own.
Michael learned this back in 1971 here in New York's Columbus Circle. He was just a few feet from Joe Colombo, the boss of the mob family he grew up in, when an assassin fired 3 shots into Joe's head.
Shots started to fire out, mass hysteria on top of the stage, everybody screaming. One guy yelled out, "Joey's been hit, Joey's been hit." And I turned around and it was almost a complete blur because people were running everywhere.
Colombo was shot by a lone gunman named Jerome Johnson, who was posing as a press photographer. Unfortunately for Johnson, whoever had plans for Joe Colombo also had plans for him.
This guy doesn't realize it. He's going to his death. He makes the move, he hits Joey within 10 seconds. He's dead. Everybody around him was carrying a piece. They pop a few into him. Everybody drops their guns. They're all over the street. I remember that. I'm running around, there's guns everywhere.
No one was charged in either shooting. The mob boss was taken to Roosevelt Hospital, where he went into a coma. Joe Colombo remained in a vegetative state for 7 years before dying, but that day ended his reign over the family that still bears his name.
So how could this happen? How could a boss of a major crime family get killed on his big day in front of all of these people? Well, that was the problem. In this life, you're supposed to fly under the radar, especially if you're a boss. You don't want to bring heat on the life.
Colombo made himself a target by creating the Italian-American Civil Rights League and claimed to be fighting the persecution of Italian Americans by law enforcement. His efforts did not sit well with other mob leaders.
Joe Colombo brought way too much press onto the La Cosa Nostra. By him creating the Italian-American Civil Rights League, he basically highlighted the role of the Mafia. He was told to knock it off. And it wasn't because he created the problem that he got hit. It was because he refused to stop all this publicity. And he had to be eliminated.
The prevalent theory, and most detectives and investigators were pretty sure that it was a deed originated by Joey Gallo.
Crazy Joe Gallo was a Colombo soldier and a famous name in the mob. It was believed he was the gunman who executed wise guy Albert Anastasia as he was getting a shave. Gallo was also a longtime rival of Joe Colombo.
Gallo had been a maverick going back for years in the family. He was a loose cannon. He wanted to kill Joe Colombo in a move where he would then take over Joe Colombo's family.
This was a well-designed mob hit. Joe Gallo knew what he was doing. But unfortunately, that wasn't the end of the story.
The Colombo family was positive that it was Joey Gallo who was behind Joe Colombo's murder, and that he exhibited the kind of audacity that he often pulled. He thought by killing Colombo he could take over the family. It didn't work out quite that way.
So here we are on the corner of Mulberry Street and Hester. This was the site of the old Umberto's Clam House. 10 months after Colombo gets hit at Columbus Circle, Joe Gallo is sitting in this restaurant with his family, celebrating his birthday. There happened to be a Colombo guy at the bar who noticed Joey sitting there with his family. He makes a phone call. Within 15 to 20 minutes, 2 shooters from the Colombo gang come in, see Joey at the table, and open fire. Joe Gallo, pretty strong guy. He gets up off the table. He runs outside, right out there, right out the front door, and he collapses on the pavement, and that's it. He's dead. And that's how things happen in this life. You don't make a move on a boss that goes unretaliated. This was an unauthorized hit. Joe Gallo figures he had a shot. He did it on his own, and it ended badly for him right here.
Joe Gallo was unsuccessful in promoting himself by taking out the boss. But that doesn't mean it can't happen, especially when it involves a ruthless gangster named John Gotti. Carlo Gambino was a mob legend and a close friend of Lucky Luciano. He became a boss in 1959 and stayed there for over 25 years. The man he picked to carry on his legacy was Paul Castellano.
Paul Castellano was the brother-in-law of Carlo Gambino. Carlo let it be known that he threw his support behind Paul. Carlo dies, Paul takes over, he's installed as boss.
Gambino's selection of Castellano was a surprise to many in the family because it was seen as a slight to his longtime underboss, Anil Delacroce.
Delacroce was very different from Castellano. Delacroce was a more old-school mob guy. Castellano was on the kind of legitimate side of the spectrum of mobsters, meaning he believed in making a lot of your money using legitimate activities.
Under Castellano, the Gambino family continued to thrive. But Delacroce loyalist John Gotti never forgot the slight to his mentor.
O'Neill liked John very much and kind of protected him.
Essentially, the family was divided between these two leaders, and when Delacroce died, that created a vacuum.
On the scene comes John Gotti. Gotti had a resentment for Paul Castellano, didn't regard him at all, talked bad about him many, many times. Neil was his protector. Neil Delacroce dies. Now Gotti's out there having talked bad and having resentment about a boss. Well, you don't get away with that.
Castellano disliked Gotti, and Gotti was pretty sure Castellano would kill him. So he decided to launch a preemptive strike.
So here we are, December 1985, close to Christmas. Paul Castellano has a meeting over here at Sparks Steakhouse. He pulls up in his car. He got his driver with him, Tommy Bellotti. They get out of the car figuring they're going to have a sit-down and a nice steak. As they exit the car and start to walk into the steakhouse, 2 shooters come up the street. Shots, 1, 2, 3, 4. Both Bellotti and Castellano they fall to the pavement, and Gotti had made his move first. At the time, John Gotti, unbeknownst to everybody, is sitting across the street in the car watching this, taking it all in. Very unusual. It's the only time that I ever heard that anybody was brazen enough to order a hit and sit there and watch it at the same time, but that was Gotti. And this is how it works. When you become boss in this life, you don't get elected. You eliminate the boss above you. And Gotti made the move, and within 2 days, he ascended to the throne of boss of the Gambino family.
Gotti's audacious behavior continued when he became boss, but he was about to be tripped up by an organization that was slow to take on the mob, but caught up in a hurry. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was America's top crime fighter for over 40 years, but not when it came to La Cosa Nostra.
We didn't want anything to do with it. I was told that J. Edgar was afraid of us like a lot of other people were.
Hoover wanted no part of combating the Mafia. In fact, for decades, he insisted it didn't exist, despite all the information he had, all the intelligence material that he had.
He was into communism. That was an easy deal. You know, you go after movie actors. You don't go after tough guys on the street.
For the FBI, everything changed when new tools were given to law enforcement.
In the 1960s, they passed the law that allowed legal wiretapping. Not just wiretapping over telephones, but eavesdropping by putting bugs in buildings or in rooms. These tools, for the first time, opened the possibility of not just attacking the low-level criminals who are out there actually collecting the loan shark money or committing the acts of extortion, but the captains and the bosses who were behind it all.
By the 1980s, the FBI had become expert at gathering the evidence they needed to put major mobsters behind bars. John Gotti became a major target, as did a glamorous figure the New York press had dubbed the Yuppie Don, Michael Franzese. After hitting it big with his illegal gas operation, Michael Franzese was forced to deal with the other side of mob success. Scrutiny from law enforcement and suspicion from his cohorts. In La Cosa Nostra, that suspicion can be fatal.
People get whacked because you broke the rules. You get called in, you go in. And if you did something wrong, you know what you're going in for. When you gotta go, you gotta go.
Michael Franzese was now very much in the sights of law enforcement. This led to attention from the media, who nicknamed him the Yuppie Don. Michael knew that this was trouble.
I felt it starting to come around me. I felt the heat starting to build. I knew that this was going to elevate in a way, but I wasn't doing anything wrong, and I always knew that I had that much. There was nothing to hide.
The heat kept building, until one day he got a call from his father, Colombo veteran Sonny Franzese.
My dad called me up, and he says, "Boss wants to see us tonight." I said, "Okay." I said, "What time you want me to pick you up?" He says, "Well, they want to do this differently." He said, "They want me to come in first, and they want you to come in second." So right away, the antenna's up, right? I'm thinking. And I said, "No, don't tell me that, Dad. We're going together." "No, we're giving an order. We got to go separate." We argued. I said, "I hope you're not wrong, because if you're wrong, we're in trouble." I was told I had to meet another captain, Jimmy Angelina. I knew Jimmy all my life, right? I get in his car, and I notice I got somebody sitting behind me. Now, Jimmy don't really introduce me. That's not good. We're going someplace, Jimmy's gonna tell me what this is all about, right? He don't say anything. And so I'm trying to get a little bit of information. He's not bending at all. So I'm getting nervous, I'll be honest with you. I don't like the setup. You got a guy in the front seat, a guy in the back seat. They put one in the back of your head, you're done. Late at night, I get out of the car. I start to walk towards the room. Jimmy falls in behind me, the other guy's behind him. I'm getting nervous. No, nervous isn't the word. No, I'm getting scared. This was either the longest or the shortest walk of my life. My knees are getting weak. My heart is beating through my chest. But all I'm focusing on is the room. What's going to happen when I get there? Is it going to be empty? Is it going to be dark? Is somebody going to be standing there? If nobody's in there, am I going to get 2 shots in the back of the head? Are they going to push me in there? And all these thoughts are running through my head, and it was all about that room. And I'm praying. I wasn't a religious person, but I'm praying to God. God, if you're up there, help me. I mean it. I'm praying. I'm saying, please don't let that room be empty. That room is empty. I'm done. I finally get to the room, and it's not empty. And I look, and I see all the brass of the family there. And I'll be honest with you, I had to just collect myself, because now I got to be ready for the battle, because now I got to deal with the boss, Carmine Persico. And let me tell you about Persico. They didn't call him the snake for nothing. This was one tough, treacherous guy. A force really to be reckoned with, and I got to deal with him now. Not easy. Hey, Michael, how are you? Sit down. It wasn't a warm greeting and all that kind of stuff, but I'm trying to calm myself down without letting them know that I'm scared. But they wanted me to be scared, no doubt about it. And they start to grill me about the gas business. Now I'm still looking over my shoulder, because that guy that was in the back of the car, if this guy was a new recruit and he had to make his way into the life, I might have been his ticket. You're in a secure place. Nobody's going to find anything there. That's a perfect place to do something like this. And so everything was lined up for me to go out. And as we're talking, I'm starting to get angry. I'm saying, hey, I don't understand. You know, I'm giving you guys more money than you ever saw in your life. I'm taking all the heat. And then I said, wait a second. Don't let me give these guys any excuses. So I catch myself, and I just go along and I answer the questions. And it was intense. They're mainly questioning me about the amount of money. I knew what to say, believe me, but I had to say it the right way, you know, without being disrespectful. I said, come on, what are we doing here? I mean, I'm getting more confident as I'm talking because, you know, I realized that there was nothing there that they had. These sit-downs don't waste time, okay? If they had something, they would have hit me with it right away. There was nothing. So now the drilling is over. I guess they're satisfied. Everything seems to be okay. They get up, they hug me, kiss me like nothing happened. Have a drink, sit down. I just wanted to get out of there. I wanted out of the place.
Michael's father had already had his sit-down and knew what his son was walking into. On the ride home, Michael received a critical piece of information about this meeting.
We're on the ride home, and Jimmy turns to me at one point and he says, I got to tell you something, and it's really significant. And he lays this devastating information on me about my father. He said, listen to me. Your father, he didn't help you one bit in there tonight. Not one bit. My father didn't help me. What are you talking about? I find out later, he didn't go out of his way to hurt me, but he didn't help me one bit. He threw me under the bus. Hey, if my son is stealing, I don't know. My son handles everything. I don't do anything. If he did anything wrong, I don't know about it. He just kind of left me on my own to handle it that night, and it could have been serious. What I said to myself that night, this life can separate father and son. What are we doing? And I said, what do I have here? I'm basically on my own.
Suddenly, Michael Francis was dealing with the darker side of mob life. His family was turning against him, and the FBI was watching his every move. And things would only get worse. He was about to go head-to-head with the ultimate gangbuster, the RICO Act.
The mob bosses never really committed any acts themselves. It was all done by underlings. A law was passed in 1970 known as the RICO Law, Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organizations Act,
which for the first time created a legal mechanism in which you could indict and charge not just individuals who directly committed crimes, but those who actually ordered the crimes, managed the crimes, and benefited from the crimes. So you could do a whole organization.
And their first targets were the commission members, the titans of organized crime. And they did it.
In a legal landmark known as the Mafia Commission Trial, prosecutors Rudolph Giuliani and Michael Chertoff used RICO to convict top bosses of every crime their underlings committed. And as the convictions started to pile up, more tough guys started to talk.
It's one thing to keep quiet when you're facing 5 years in prison. It's another thing to keep quiet when you're facing 50 years in prison.
I mean, years ago, the police used to have to beat you to get any information out of you. Now they got to smack you around and shut you up.
The 1980s and 1990s saw an unprecedented crackdown against organized crime throughout the country. The RICO law was very effective. The commission case had proved that you could get the top people.
The Mafia commission case ultimately put the top bosses and underbosses of all 5 families behind bars and drove a dagger into the heart of the mob's infrastructure.
They had the Mafia commission case on at that time. They're all going to trial and they're coming back. Who's getting 50 years, 100 years, 150 years? I said, what the heck? I'm the youngest guy ever. They're going to give me 300 years on this case.
RICO was probably the nuclear weapon that decimated the mob. With that said, I think the mob was brought down internally as well.
You'd have to look at this as a series of waves. The first wave was the family cases and the commission case, which wiped out the entire existing structure of bosses. There was then a next generation. The next generation was not as skillful or discreet as the earlier generation, and that made it easier to take them down.
One of that new breed was John Gotti, the brash gangster who took over the Gambino family and ultimately shared more mob secrets than anyone.
If the FBI had wanted to destroy organized crime, the mob, their best candidate would have been John Gotti.
By the 1980s, the American Mafia was beginning to crumble due to the FBI and crusading prosecutors. But the biggest factor in their downfall may have been one mobster's ego.
The Mafia's history is filled with godfathers who were done in by hubris, who thought they were invincible, that they could do whatever they wanted, and that usually led to disasters. The best candidate for that in the modern American Mafia would have been John Gotti.
John Gotti was totally incompetent as a boss. Let's be honest about it. Gotti had no clue how to run a legitimate business. He was the muscle guy. They extorted businesses to get their money. That's all they did.
He had been a thug. He didn't know much about white-collar crime. He had no idea about how to handle this gigantic family. In addition to that, he was a megalomaniac. He demanded that at least once a week, everybody in the family had to come and show him court at the Ravenite. And yet at the same time, he was so vindictive. Anybody who crossed him was murdered.
His ego got the best of him. He actually started believing his own headlines, so that every day he had to be in the paper.
And then the final stroke that he did was that he blabbed.
Wiretaps, particularly from this apartment above Gotti's Ravenite Social Club, provided a treasure trove of incriminating information.
They had 2,000 hours of tapes on John Gotti and his crew. Well, they talked nothing but mob business for 2,000 hours. So everything about that life that the feds needed to know, it came through those surveillance tapes and through the bugging devices on Gotti's places of business.
In the winter, rather than do a walk and talk, go out in the cold streets, he would sit in an apartment, not thinking it was bugged, and openly discussing everything.
John Gotti told the feds everything there was to know about that life. Everything. I mean, there wasn't a stone unturned.
So Gotti, by his own actions, not only destroyed himself, but he virtually destroyed the Gambino family.
Maybe so, but don't tell that to a loyal mob guy.
I'm gonna say this. You want to put this on the air, you can. I have so much respect for John Gotti that I don't want to talk about him. Okay? I don't want to talk about him. Because there's a guy who did it from the day he was born until the day he died. He did it the way it's supposed to be done.
Gotti died in a federal prison in 2002, but he earned the respect of his peers because he stuck to a code that mob guys hold sacred. Never talk to the feds, and if busted, do your time.
I hate this place. This is the federal courthouse for the Eastern District of New York, and this is where all the main stuff took place for us. This was the last stop before he went to prison.
It's part of the life. This is what happens. You know, one day you're in a Learjet, next day you're in Leavenworth. You do what you have to do, you shut your mouth, you go do your time, and that's the end of it.
Mobsters understood that they assumed the risk of going to jail, and they accepted that may very well happen.
Prison's the cost of doing business for these guys. That's the way they look at it.
The general rule is you stand up. You don't try to get out of it.
Was I scared of it? No. I knew that prison was part of the life. I knew at some point in time I'd probably do some time.
The more serious the prisons were, like Leavenworth, that was the easiest time to do, because there was no guys got killed. You could walk down the chow line and there could be a body laying there, okay? So when you're in that environment, everybody kind of respects one another. As long as you're not bothering anybody, you're fine.
My dad taught me something that served me very well. He said, Mike, when you go to prison, remember to say please, to say thank you, and to say excuse me. You be courteous in there. It goes a long way.
For Michael Francis, prison was becoming more of a reality. He was acquitted on 4 previous charges, but a relentless prosecutor named Rudolph Giuliani was determined to bring him down.
Rudy Giuliani, he indicts me on a big racketeering case. I go to trial, boom, I beat the case. Several months later, they indict me on this whole gas charge. And I told my lawyer, I said, listen, I'm going to take a plea. I beat this government so many times, they're going to want to get some time on me. I said, let's try to negotiate.
Michael had another reason to make a deal. He had recently married, and for the first time ever, he began to question the values of mob life.
This young girl, who's now my wife, she was a very strong woman of faith. My wife started to work on me, and seeing the way she conducted her life, that started to give me cause to think, hey, maybe I was a pretty bad guy, and I didn't even realize it. So that started to come into play, but not at that point. At that point, it was kind of survival. How am I going to have a life? Because am I going to be behind bars the rest of my life? Well, I might get killed. I'd rather take my chances that way, because I got experience there.
Michael decided to take the government's deal and use his prison time to figure out his future.
I take the plea to racketeering, 2 counts of racketeering. We negotiated down to 10 years and a $15 million restitution. So I figured maybe I'll do 4 or 5, and I go off to do my time.
One thing Michael knew he couldn't do was testify against any made members of the Mafia. But the feds tested his loyalty many times.
I went through the roughest times in prison, meaning that later on when the feds were trying to get me to cooperate in a big way, they put me on diesel therapy. What does that mean? They don't let you stay in any one prison. They throw you in a hole until they transport you someplace else. They take you out in the middle of the night. The family don't know where you are. It was horrible. And then I was in a hole. I spent a total of 29 months and 7 days, 24/7, 6x8 cell. That was it. You're in a hole, you could go crazy. The worst part of prison for me was being separated from my family. I had just gotten married. I don't want to lose my wife. I don't want to lose that relationship. My wife was really the catalyst for this. Meeting her, getting this indictment, being in jail, that kind of sailed it for me. I said, I'm going to make the break.
There is no definitive guide for leaving the American Mafia. For Michael Francis, a made man, the step he was about to take was unprecedented.
You know, I'm thinking, I don't know anybody that walked away from that life. You either leave in a coffin or you join the government and enter a witness protection program. Neither one of those was an option that I was interested in.
Combined, Michael served nearly 8 years in federal prison. When he was released in 1995, he was determined to start a new life.
It really marked the end of my life in the mob. That was it for me.
But Michael needed to make an honest living for the first time in his life. When he was offered a lucrative book deal to tell his story, he accepted.
I sit down with this writer and we write the book. I was inexperienced at that time. I didn't know the title was going to be Quitting the Mob. That really said it to everybody, and that I was really out of the life. And it kind of made it no turning back for me, too. I mean, that was big.
Then came an opportunity where Michael could use his mob experience as a source for good. He was asked to speak to professional and college athletes about the epic problem of gambling in sports.
I said, I can't do that. Big, tough mob guy, you can't speak to a couple athletes? I said, all right, set it up, I'll be there, right? That started me on another career. Since 1998, I have visited just about 400 universities throughout the country and spoke to all the student athletes. And I carry this message to all of them. You get involved in gambling, okay, you're leaving yourself open. You are a target. You are a money-making machine for somebody out there that wants to take advantage of you. Whether they're mob guys, bookmakers, or anybody that wants to gamble and make money with you. and they cringe, they get scared. You know, I've tried to right this wrong in many ways by making myself available, and it's been a very successful program.
Michael had started a new chapter, but he had broken the vow of silence he took when he joined the mob in 1975. Now his life was in jeopardy, and he needed a plan.
So what am I going to do? Honestly, there's no blueprint for walking away from that life and living. So it was kind of like, create this as you go along.
When Michael Franzese quits the mob, I say to myself, you just don't quit like this. There's only one way out of the mob, feet first.
It's not even believable, and yet we lived and saw it happen.
The American Mafia went from a ragtag group of street thugs to a sprawling criminal empire that affected commerce across the nation. Michael Franzese was born into this world and rose to become one of its most prominent made members. Then he literally risked his life to do something he swore he'd never do: walk away.
The truth is, if you leave the mob and you're not in the witness protection program, there's a very high likelihood you will not survive.
When Michael publicly quit the mob, he knew his biggest threat came from one person: his former boss in the Colombo family, Carmine Persico.
When I decided to make the move to walk away, I knew I was in trouble. Feds told me, hey, we got word that Persico's putting a hit out on you and your father's going along with it. I figured, what was my father going to do? He turned on me once. And what I said to myself, okay, this time around, they're not walking me to a room. They're going to have to come and get me. Persico, he was the strength at that point in time. He took it very personal when I walked away. An FBI agent told me that they had his cell bugged, and he got a copy of my book, and when he got it, he threw against the wall and started ripping the pages out after he read it. He was so incensed over me. If he had the opportunity today, I'd be dead.
The question remains, why is Michael Franzese alive?
At the end of the day, there wasn't anything I planned. You know, I'm a person of faith, and I believe my purpose wasn't to die in a hail of bullets in that life. That's the spiritual reason. The practical reason is that I knew the life as well as anybody. I knew the modus operandi. I knew what the guys would do, and I knew what they wouldn't do. I said, you know what? It's one thing to walk a guy into a room. It's another thing to send a hit squad across the country to kill somebody that's aware and get away with it. So at least I can use my wits and use my experience and knowledge to try to make this happen. And I knew they were never going to walk me in a room again.
Michael knew that if he wanted to stay alive, he would have to make certain changes to his lifestyle.
I don't create a pattern in my life. I don't walk my dog 7 o'clock in the morning every morning. I don't go to clubs. Guy spots me, makes a call back to New York, wherever I am, LA, Miami. He wants to make a name for himself. I walk out into the parking lot, boom, I'm gone. I don't go to the same restaurant, sit in the same seat every Tuesday night. I can't move back into the neighborhood and say, hey guys, I'm coming back. I probably wouldn't last 48 hours.
Over the last 20 years, Michael Franzese has essentially won a war of attrition. The biggest reason for his victory is likely the 139-year prison sentence being served by Carmine Persico.
Persico, he's gone. The guys that really had it in for me, they're gone. So the bottom line is, I outlasted everybody. I think things just fell into place.
In fairness, he never really put any gangsters away. One could say, well, you know, he really never hurt the organization. He was really never a threat, but he did acknowledge that the organization existed.
I would not testify against any made guy, and I wouldn't go beyond that.
It's like a brother who does something to embarrass you. Do you hate him forever for it? When you love a person like he's your brother, you love him. You know what I mean? And the bottom line is, although he did things that made a lot of people unhappy, he actually didn't put anyone in jail.
And what about the towering figure who introduced Michael to mob life, his father, Sonny Franzese?
After it became public, my dad writes me off. 10 years later, he sends me a message, Mike, I want to see you. I'll never forget. I open the door, and he's standing there about 10 feet away from me. And he looks at me and he says, if you'd have listened to me, you'd have been the boss of the Colombo family. I didn't know what to say, right? And he looked at me and he says, "You really serious about this walking away?" I said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "All right, let's talk." And that kind of broke the ice. And I got to say now that, you know, my dad and I are closer than ever. I'm glad. I'm really glad because, you know, I told him one day, I said, "Dad, the difference between you and I, you don't get it. You've sacrificed your entire family. The difference with you and I is I'm not doing that to my family." At some point, I came to understand that the life it's an evil life. I don't know one family of any member of that life that hasn't been totally devastated. I don't mean hurt, I mean devastated. And my family alone, my dad did over 30 years in prison. During that time, my mom was a single mom, essentially, had to raise these kids. My sister died of an overdose of drugs while my dad was in prison. My brother, drug addict for over 25 years. My younger sister, another one, died. When I look back, I realized that it was this life that caused all of that. And that makes it an evil life.
At the end of 2008, Sonny Franzese was released from what looked to be his final incarceration. But just over 2 years later, he was headed back to prison for his role in extorting strip clubs in a pizzeria.
My dad, the oldest living mob guy in America, he gets involved in another racketeering case. Goes back to prison at the age of 94. You know, I see him now, he's in a wheelchair, and but we still talk and reminisce mob stuff. It's still so much a part of him, you know.
But the mob Sonny Franzese knew is gone. La Cosa Nostra was basically destroyed by the combination of the RICO statutes and its own internal decline.
The mob was brought down in two ways, I think. I think law enforcement had a very distinct impact on bringing the mob down. Two, I think what happened within the mob was that many of the values that the old-timers brought to the mob were basically dissipating.
It seems that countless movies and TV shows about mob life have created a romantic image of the Mafia that doesn't fit the full story.
You know what kills me with these young kids today I speak to? They'll see a movie like Godfathers, and they are so infatuated with the life. "Oh my gosh, you guys had the money, the power, the women, the cars, everything." I said, "Yeah, that's true. But did you see the other side of the movie, the second half? Who got killed, who went to jail?" They don't see that part. But it's a whole different generation. They're not going to stand up like the guys that I saw, the guys that I lived with, that I was honestly fortunate to see, because that was the real life.
It's not the same. It's not the same as it was. You know what I mean?
By the end of the 20th century, the mob was nearly decimated. But on a sunny September day in 2001, it suddenly became less of a priority for law enforcement.
9/11, the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon by terrorists, actually gave a reprieve to organized crime. There was a huge cutback in the number of prosecutors and FBI agents who are now assigned to Mafia or organized crime cases.
Everything's focused on terrorism. Resources have been devoted primarily to stopping the next terrorist attack. And I might point out, many of the techniques developed in investigating organized crime have now been transferred over to the investigation of terrorism.
When I became the Secretary of Homeland Security, one of the benefits of my experience doing organized crime cases was having learned how to take huge amounts of data and information and making sense out of it. That's what you do in counterterrorism work.
The consequence, however, we've got limited resources devoted to the investigation of organized crime.
During my day, they had 1,200 agents on 750 guys in the mob. Today, from my understanding, that number has dwindled down to 150 or 200. But what's going to happen? These guys are going to build up again.
There'll always be organized crime in America. Capitalism germinates organized crime. As long as there's a need for illegal goods and services, we will have organized crime. Will La Cosa Nostra be what it was 20 or 30 years ago? Probably not.
I think what's been interesting in the last 10 years is that they've moved into the field of electronics. We're now dealing with cybercrime. That's where the money is. That's what the mob does. They follow the money in terms of deciding where they're going to devote their efforts.
Michael Franzese, the guy who could have written the definitive guide to the mob, understands our fascination with the Mafia and knows there'll always be an attraction to the mysterious men of La Cosa Nostra.
The best quality that mob guys have is how to get around somebody, how to make them feel comfortable, how to make them feel protected and strong, and then get them to go and do their work. Yeah, people are very attracted to mob guys, but you're going to get into business with this guy, you're going to do things with him, don't get on the wrong side of him. Trust me on that.